Hi, and welcome to another episode of Miss EoE Health and Wellness. I'm Kate, and I'm so glad you're here with me today so we can talk about all topics when it comes to holistic health, helping our kids live great lives, and ultimately talking about root cause issues of why different ailments, symptoms, conditions, all of the things end up happening and what we can do about it. Today, I want to talk about a topic that's very near and dear to my heart because I feel like it's a condition that a lot of parents overlook because they just don't know about it and because their providers don't know about it either. So I want to pose the question, do you have a picky eater? It's definitely something that we have struggled with in our family. But if you have a picky eater, and I want to take that a step further, is your picky eater someone who doesn't like to swallow food? Maybe like they like to pack food in their mouth, chew it up a whole bunch of different times, trying to get this sensation of swallowing, but just they can't really figure it out. Is your child who has issues with texture? Does your child have issues with throwing up a good bit? Maybe they have issues with eczema, a whole bunch of other different symptoms that just don't seem to be adding up because they just feel kind of blah. Maybe they're just not hungry. Maybe they just don't want to eat at all. Maybe food makes them feel uncomfortable, or they say, Mommy, my tummy hurts, or I don't like that very much. That doesn't make me feel right. Maybe they're not saying anything at all, and you're just observing all of these symptoms and wondering how you are going to get adequate nutrition into your child. Whichever side it might be, chances are, if you've asked your pediatrician about these issues, he or she will tell you, yeah, that's a stage that all of them go through. They'll grow out of it as long as they're on the weight curve, as long as they're eating, a variety of things. We'll just watch it and it'll be fine. But here's the thing. What if this goes on for a while, or you find that your child does start to fall down on the weight scale and ultimately becomes a failure to thrive child? Or maybe they're great on their weight, but they have all of those picky sensations that I was talking about earlier, and they don't want to eat food at all. The condition that I want to share with you today is something that I didn't know about for a long time, but I'm hopeful that in sharing this information with you might help you in your journey so that you don't spend so many years wondering how in the world to solve this, what it is that's going on with your child, and what you can do to help them. So I want to start with a story. When my son was an infant, I knew something felt off. The best thing I can tell you is that it was a mom gut reaction. I just knew something was just off. He passed all of the tests when I took him to the doctor as far as he was eating, he was growing, he looked okay. I mean, he threw up every now and again, but it wasn't one of these things that I was incredibly worried about his health, that I knew like something is direly wrong here and we need to fix it. I just knew that something wasn't right. And so as we started his journey through his infancy, it was a lot of symptoms like colic. He just was never comfortable, and he would writhe, he would like arch his back a lot, scooch his little legs up and cry. And I could just tell his tummy was not happy. I hear a lot of gurgling inside. He was strictly breastfed for a long time, and it didn't seem to matter what I ate. We always seemed to have these issues going on. I took milk out of my diet. I took eggs out of my diet. I took just about all of the top allergens you could think of out of my diet, trying to give relief to my child. But then eczema happened, and it was pretty rough, and it was all over his body, and it was clear that his immune system was just not happy. He would catch a cold. It seemed like it would last for weeks as opposed to days, where most children would get over things relatively quickly within a few days or so. His just kept on and on and on. And it never seemed to be something that we could fix for him. And I asked doctors about it. They were like, man, it's okay. We'll give you some steroids for the eczema, and, just keep feeding him, feed him a whole lot of calories, because yes, he's starting to drop off the weight curve, but we think we can fix it this way. And I can't tell you how many times I went to the doctor because of a cold or some kind of ailment that was going on, and it just felt like we were there all the time. And it wasn't until he was about 9 months old and we had tried some solid foods and he was throwing those up, not consistently. It was just every now and again. That I asked my pediatrician, and I actually had a different one who came along on our journey during that particular time because my primary one was out for a vacation or something like that. And I remember asking her, I said, I have all these symptoms. I don't feel like I understand what's going on. And at that point in time, we had also tried feeding him a lot of calories, a lot of food. I had upped, trying to feed him solid foods, and we were still breastfeeding at the time. It was like all the things that we were trying to do, and he barely moved on the weight curve. And she said, this reminds me of something that I learned way back in residency, something called and I finished her sentence for her. I said, eosinophilic esophagitis. And she said, yes. What's that? You know what that is? And I said, yes, I know what that is. I actually know about it because I know other members in our family who struggle with that as well. And she said, well, I wonder if that is what is going on with your son. And she set me up with specialists and all of the things to try to figure out and connect these pieces and put all of the things together. And sure enough, that's what he had. So it was something called EoE for short, or that's what we call it in the esophageal world, is EoE. And if you've never heard of it, or if you've never had it brought up by your pediatrician, don't be surprised. There's a lot of people who have never heard of this condition. Since my son's diagnosis and learning about all of this, I've had to school a lot of nurses especially, and even primary care physicians and doctors to know exactly what my son deals with on a daily basis and how we have to live an alternative lifestyle in order to make sure that everything is being fit together for him to live well and to live healthy. So how did we get here, and what do we do for it all? Well, the truth is, because of him getting sick so much with different foods and seeming to throw up, breast milk, throwing up solid foods, getting the eczema patches, constantly being sick, he ended up being on the failure to thrive scale. And what that means is on the weight curve, where you have like the weight and the height for each of the boys and the girls that come together at the different ages and give you like the average of where a child is supposed to be. He actually fell off of that weight curve, like completely below it. And so he got something that they call a Z score, meaning that again, failure to thrive, but there's different levels of severity of what that Z score is. And at one point, my son got so severe, it was on a severe side. So it goes mild, moderate, severe, and then extreme. And my son got to the severe. It was really scary for a time. He actually was very small for his age. And that explained part of why he was catching everything under the sun as far as sicknesses go. But it also left me feeling, okay, well, if he has this EoE condition, what do we do with this, and how do we get him to eat food? And I'll tell you, it was really, really hard, and especially at such a young age, because he was diagnosed pretty early at 11 months old. A lot of families that I talk to, this condition doesn't come up in discussion until they're 2, 3, 4, 5, sometimes even as late as teenager years, when all of these symptoms over the years start to compound and parents are realizing, wow, this just doesn't seem like it should be normal. What do we do about it? The only way to figure out if you have EoE is to do an upper endoscopy and take a biopsy of the esophagus and determine if there's a white blood cell called an eosinophil. All of us have one, but they don't really belong in the GI tract. And when they take a biopsy of the esophagus and they're looking for how many eosinophils are there, any number that is 15 or above is considered to be active EoE. My son's numbers were through the roof, but the truth is you don't have to be through the roof to have active EoE and to suffer from the symptoms. The truth is that the diagnosis is just one step in the equation. And so while it gave us an answer as to what was going on, it didn't give us an answer as to what we should do. So the challenging piece was, okay, we have this diagnosis, we have all of these symptoms, how do we fix it? And at the time, the best remedy for us was to put him on a PPI, a proton pump inhibitor, which would reduce the stomach acid. hopeful that maybe that would be the remedy for it, because maybe the eosinophils were present because of acid reflux. But that didn't end up being our answer. And so then the next answer was, well, you can swallow a daily steroid called budesonide, and you swallow that by mixing it with something really thick, usually like a sweetener, because the medicine doesn't taste great, but some kind of sweetener. And then you swallow that down, and it's supposed to coat the esophagus. And from there, it kills the eosinophils so that you no longer have active EoE. But the trick is you have to take that daily. Well, our option, after trying a myriad of foods and also eliminating different foods, because we were like, well, are there certain foods that are triggering this condition? And statistically speaking, milk is one of the top irritants of EoE, as are eggs and wheat, shellfish, and a whole bunch, the top 8 allergens typically that you have with the IgE reactions. But the truth is too, it could be anything. And that was what was perplexing to me. Just because you have an IgE allergy to milk, eggs, wheat, shellfish, whatever, just because you have an IgE allergy does not necessarily mean that it will trigger inflammation in the esophagus due to those eosinophils. They could overlap, but they don't necessarily overlap. So he could be eating something like green beans and that be causing his EoE. Or he could be eating something like beef or chicken or corn or any of the other foods that are out there that aren't necessarily on the top 8 allergen list. Soy and corn could be 2 that are on there. And those were ones that we tried to avoid for a time. But it got really difficult to figure out, gosh, how many foods do we have to eliminate in order to figure out what are his triggers? So what we ended up doing out of the 3 options that we had of do nothing, well, actually it was 4 options: do nothing, do a PPI, do budesonide, or do an elimination diet, meaning that we get rid of certain foods. We decided to start with the PPI, and we did an elimination diet. We did both of those together. We were at an advantage, at least in his story, that we were able to start when he was so young that we could put him on a hypoallergenic formula that we had to get by prescription only from our pharmacist. And actually we had to get it as a mail order supply, because only certain companies would create the type of formula that we needed that would eliminate all different types of proteins that could trigger the eosinophilic reaction that he was having. And it was expensive and it tasted terrible. But it was our only option that we had at the time. And this was before I got into holistic remedies and figured out other ways to be able to navigate these waters. But ultimately what we did is that, and we eliminated, we put him on a strictly elemental diet. What that means is that he was only on formula for 3 months. And then we had to get a scope done again, an upper GI, to determine, did that work? The answer was yes. So then we knew, okay, it is foods that are likely triggering it, but which ones? And so the way we figured that out is slowly adding them back in. But the hard piece was with our particular case is that it didn't seem like we fit any type of box. It didn't matter what foods we added in. Some seemed to be triggers, some didn't. They seemed to ebb and flow. Like it just was a mess of trying to isolate and figure out, okay, what can this child eat? And in the meantime, he turned 1, and throughout year 1, he was predominantly on a hypoallergenic formula. Well, then that resulted in some feeding issues because he didn't learn how to use his tongue properly and a whole myriad of other things. But the truth was that we had to find something because we needed to get our child back on the weight curve. Ultimately, long story short, the way that we were able to fix this was, while we did eventually try the budesonide, and we did that for a time and it seemed like it was working, eventually that didn't work either. And that's when we landed on doing things more from the inside out and healing his body the way I really wanted to do all along. And that was what gave us the best momentum forward and figuring out how we were going to get this child to survive. But I'll tell you, and this was really hard for me as a mom with a child who couldn't even talk yet when he was diagnosed with all of these things. I got scared. I got really scared. And I thought, can it be as simple? And I say simple with quotes because simple is subjective, right? But could it be as simple as just removing milk from his diet and then he would be cured? I wish that was our story. That can be the story for a lot of people, but for our particular case, that was not it. That wasn't enough. And so we went down this long road of trying to figure out what foods they were that were triggering and what medicines would work and what strategies would work. And ultimately, because this went on for so long and we just could never land on the perfect recipe that worked for his particular body type, we ended up with a feeding tube as well. And ultimately, that was just to supplement calories because he wasn't able to take in enough food, enough nourishment at the time in order to sustain being on the weight curve. But again, as I said just a few minutes ago, what I love is that after that time and trying all of the things, we were able to come up with a solution that worked for him and allowed him to truly thrive. And so I say all of that and I share this story as one part of several that I plan to release to tell you about our EoE journey, to shed light on it, to help you figure out, does your child have these symptoms? Is your child one who is struggling, who is suffering? Maybe they're doing great on the weight curve, but they have all of these other issues with eating that I mentioned. There are many families I've talked to where their child didn't fall off the weight curve and they ended up being great, sometimes in like the 90th percentile, but they had all of these other issues with not being able to swallow, or seemed like they were burping a lot, or throat clearing, or had a lot of eczema. Like there were a whole lot of other things that were going on that were definitely worth exploring. And it seemed like this mystery thing that a lot of pediatricians, nurses, and whatnot don't put the dots together to say, oh, could it be this? At least that was our story and our experience with it. And it wasn't until the third practitioner that we had gone through with my son's care that the term was even come up for me of the eosinophilic esophagitis. So I share all of that with you to give you some insight on A, what EoE is, B, what to look for symptoms in your own child, and C, what kind of questions to ask your practitioner to see if that might be something worth exploring for your child. But the fourth thing that I want you to hang on to is that even though like me, I was really, really scared in the beginning. I was like, what is my child going to eat? Will he be able to go to school? Will he be able to take someone out on a date? Will he be able to attend college? Will he be able to survive? All of those questions ran through my head. Sitting almost a decade later now, I can tell you yes, confidently, to just about all of those different questions that I had, that there is hope, that there are ways that you can manage EoE. It is not a death sentence. Is it hard? Yeah, it really is. And to try to navigate around the different restaurants and different meal planning and how to make sure your pantry is stacked correctly, like all of those things are hard. And it's a real adjustment as a family, especially if it's not something that you've ever had to deal with or do before. But the great thing is that there are ways to manage it, and there are tangible ways to manage it. And more importantly, it's affordable. There are ways to do this on a shoestring budget when you feel like you don't have a lot of means, a lot of funds, a lot of everything to throw at stuff. Does it mean that it will look like you can go to the grocery store and get whatever you want whenever you want? Not necessarily. But if you know what to look for, if you know what to seek out in the way of brands and the way of ingredients, the way of types of foods that support the gut, all the things, that's what I'm hopeful that I can teach and help you with as we continue this different series about EoE. I hope this episode has been helpful for you, just at least shedding some light and giving you a cursory picture of what EoE can look like to determine if that's something that will affect you and your family. If it's something that you need to look into and pursue further with your provider and your practitioners. We'll go into more depth of the different providers that you would need for a case for EoE, as well as the types of foods and things like that to look for as far as triggers, as well as ones that you can use as substitutes in future episodes that we'll release soon. I hope this episode has been helpful. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. I'll be happy to reach out and answer them in any way I can. And also, if you like this episode, please remember to like that and also subscribe so that you don't miss the next couple of episodes that will talk very specifically about this condition and how you can apply the different principles that we have learned along the way in your family too. So until next time.